Redemption Road, The Quest for Peace and Justice in Liberia. By Elma Shaw. Part A. Bendu Lewis had never imagined fleeing a blazing village could feel like escaping hell itself. In the height of Liberia's civil war, rebels had stormed the countryside, and by the time she and her 90-year-old grandmother, Granny May, arrived in Charlevoix town to visit relatives, danger had already descended. Bendu was pushing Granny May in a rusty wheelbarrow along a dusty road out of Charlevoix when the first rocket screamed overhead. The clan of terrified villagers surged into motion. Men, women, and children running for their lives as distant gunfire and explosions rent the air. Babies were abandoned at the roadside, their mothers either too weak or too frightened to carry them any farther. Elderly people slumped or sat in despair, crying for help that never came. Bendu's heart twisted as she saw a small boy trampled underfoot and countless mothers wailing for the children they had lost. All around, the anguished cries of her neighbors mingled with the thundering of artillery. "Leave that old woman and run," a stranger shouted, hoisting a trembling child over the wheelbarrow. In that moment, Bendu realized the grim truth. Granny May, withered and frail, was dying. A thick cloud of acrid smoke and fear began to consume the street. "Old Ma's time is finished," snarled a matron as she grabbed Bendu's shoulder. "Come, go on. Save yourself." Bendu refused. She refused to abandon the woman who had raised her, but the rockets grew closer. A bright flash and thunderous boom behind them told of another village shelled to ruin. Babies on the roadside screamed. People left them without a second glance. People tripped over the fallen. Children's little bodies lay broken. My daughter, help me." Some sick old men begged as Bendu and the fleeing throngs hurried by. Granny May weakly croaked, "Go, baby. Leave me." Bendu squeezed her hand. "No, Granny, no. I'm not leaving you." As the wails and gunfire crescendoed, Bendu's arms began to ache. Her palms had blistered from gripping the wooden wheelbarrow handles. Each step burned the muscles in her legs. She thought again of dropping her grandmother, but horror at the thought tightened her throat. "We'll get out of here together, I promise," Bendu panted, rocking Granny May gently against her chest. But the old woman's head fell back and her eyes glazed over. Granny May was gone. For a moment Bendu stood numbly, cradling what was now her grandmother's lifeless body, when a tall rebel stepped over, cursing loudly. The rebels were ragged and fierce. Commander Cobra, a brutal warlord with a bullet hole through his jacket, led them. His second-in-command, Samson, a hulking man with matted dreadlocks, eyed Bendu with contempt. Cobra barked orders in the local dialect. One by one, the men in fatigues halted, and the women and children of his group gathered around. Cobra eyed Bendu sitting with Granny May's cold body. "Who is this?" he demanded, peering down. Bendu lifted herself, forcing back her sobs. "My name is Bendu Lewis," she croaked, steadying her voice. Fear gripped her as Samson grinned and raised his rifle at her. Cobra frowned and commanded, "Stand up, girl." Bendu obeyed, her limbs trembling. "Why are you carrying her body?" Cobra asked calmly, though the men near Samson snickered and taunted. "Put that old woman down." Bendu only clutched the wheelbarrow tighter and screamed, "No, I'm staying with her." The fighters tried to drag her away. Before they could, Samson smashed the butt of his gun across Bendu's left hand. Bone cracked beneath the impact. Bendu shrieked, finally releasing the handles, and fell unconscious. Hours later, Bendu jolted awake in darkness. Rebel soldiers murmured around a small campfire. Her head throbbed, and her left hand felt numb and broken. She blinked and saw her family's friends and cousins. They were all here at her grandmother's funeral, their concerned faces leaning over her. But it was all a blur. Her mind leapt back to that day of terror, the machine gun roars, the flashing explosions, the sharp pain in her hand. When she was left alone in the late afternoon, Bendu quietly slipped away, careful not to make a sound. Across the hall of the mission where the service was held, the people were preparing tea. Aunt Rebecca reached for her hand gingerly. Bendu looked down at her ruined fingers, tears threatening, and allowed herself to cry for her grandmother. The war was over. Liberia was supposed to be at peace, but for Bendu Lewis, the war still lived in her mind. By 2006, she had thrown herself into peace work in Monrovia. Every morning she climbed the hill from Broad Street up to the offices of Peace in Practice, the NGO she co-founded with her friend Agnes Jalla. Today, as she took a yellow taxi through the bustling markets of Broad Street, the rancid odor of sewage after the late rains reminded her of something far worse, the stench of death she had seen when she first returned to Monrovia after the war. The street had been littered with blooded bodies, dangling wires, bullet-pocked buildings. Now walls were fresh white and the orange blossom flame trees were in bloom, but in Bendu's heart Monrovia was still haunted by ghosts. Entering PIP's offices, Bendu paused at the reception area. Photographs lined the walls, scenes of ex-combatants laying down arms, women in the 2001 Peace March sobbing outside the U.S. Embassy, girls in vocational class, AIDS awareness workshops. Her eyes lingered on the March photo. Women of every age wept softly as they read their resolution demanding an end to war. Not cries of despair, but quiet outpourings of collective pain for lost children, stolen futures, dismembered families. Bendu drew a deep breath. For years after Charles Taylor's election, violence still raged in the interior. Recruits were kidnapping children, towns were falling. It seemed to her that real peace remained far off, justice still a dream. Upstairs, Agnes Jalla was arranging chairs for their morning counseling session. Agnes, 10 years Bendu's junior, hadn't finished high school but had a gift for reaching traumatized women. Agnes and Bendu greeted each other with warm smiles. "Calvin came by to see you," Agnes teased, mistaking Bendu's smile at the news for something else. Bendu rolled her eyes. Calvin Daniels was a close friend, intelligent and handsome. He had even helped sponsor one of PIP's community events, but Bendu remained reticent. Inez's eyebrows crinkled. "Bendu, give him a chance. He's a good man. You just don't let your past rule your future." Bendu sighed as she made herself some tea. She thought of Jonah, her beloved fiancé, who had died 2 months before their wedding. The thought still felt like a jagged shard in her chest. "Agnes, don't you think that's exactly what I'm trying to do? Learn from the past?" Bendu's voice trembled. Agnes smiled mischievously. "Of course, but Jonah's death wasn't your fault. He was loved so much. And Calvin's a good man too, if Jonah hadn't. Anyway, Calvin's handsome and sweet," Bendu admitted, "but I'm just not ready. I'm still." She picked up the crystal Madonna statuette on her desk. Ironically, people often asked if she was Catholic, and set it between an engagement photo of her and Jonah. His smile in the frame was gentle, full of love and hope. "He wasn't a miracle worker who could save me from all this pain." Bendu closed her eyes. In the photo, she and Jonah's eyes met. He had turned to face the camera just before the shutter clicked. She imagined looking for omens in their expression, but only saw a future hope unfulfilled. Agnes patted Bendu's shoulder. "He would want you to find happiness," she murmured. Bendu finished her tea and walked over to her desk. "One more day like this, and I'll just take the whole village with me," she laughed, preparing an afternoon's materials. Tomorrow was just another day, and she needed to focus on her work. Outside the PIP office, the sun was already high. 14-year-old Tana sat quietly in the brightly painted waiting room, clutching a small towel to her face. Bendu recognized the depression in the girl's eyes. Rosetta and Josephine, 2 of their war victim clients, flanked her. Bendu took her seat at their counseling circle as they began the day's session. Each young woman had been assigned to write a letter to the person who had caused them the greatest pain in the war. These letters always surfaced buried grief. Tana stood with trembling hands and began to read. "Dear Mama, sometimes I wonder if it was a dream. But the pain in my womb tells me it was real. My own mother betrayed me. You stood there as those fighters took me away to become a cook for them. You said, 'No, take this boy, he's too young to fight.' My daughter can work for you. At 12 years old I was just a child. When I started crying and ran back to you, you pushed me away, saying, "Carry your naked self from here before the children see you." I didn't know where to go. Mama, a stranger, had to wrap me in a cloth and comfort me. How could you give me away like I was nothing? Your daughter, Tana. Silence and sudden tears filled the circle. Rosetta and Josephine reached out, trembling with their own hurt, one on each side of Tana. Bendu clenched her jaw as she listened. It was unimaginable, a mother giving up her little girl to save her son's life, then banishing her screaming child to the jungle. Bendu's mind flew back to herself at 12, safe in Monrovia, her beloved brother Ben and Jonah, both 12 then, outside playing, while she tended her grandmother and mother at home. She had the luxury of innocence. The pain Tana felt was something Bendu would never know firsthand. Agnes waited until Tana sat down sniffling. She paced slowly before the group, giving each woman a chance to absorb the raw confession. "We've heard all 3 letters," she said softly. "Each one is a cry for justice and love." She paused. "But we are still alive, right? If we are still here, we have to believe something better is possible." Agnes nodded at Bendu, and their work continued, the discussion threading from heartbreak to hope, to how to face those who hurt them. Evening fell in Congo town, but rest did not come easily to Bendu. That night, she tossed and turned in her rented house. For the second night in a row, the war had found her dreams again. In her sleep, she saw herself jogging with other women on a dusty path under a dripping tropical sun. That morning drill was shattered by a crash. Commander Cobra and guards marched a group of naked, bound men into the clearing. One of them lay dead on the ground, his head severed from his body. His skull had been used to top Cobra's walking stick. Cobra smiled at her, then threw her a blood-smeared knife. "This is your work," he hissed. She woke with a start, her sheets soaked with sweat. Bendu bolted upright and saw the fan spinning lazily on the ceiling. The air still smelled faintly of marijuana, Commander Cobra's habit. She had learned. She was in Monrovia, not Duluma. Safety was close, but her heart was in her throat. In the deep silence of her house, she heard the distant cry of a street vendor hawking soaps and bleach. Tide soap, washing soap, blue, the mundane chorus of her city, reassuringly ordinary. Slowly, realization settled. She was safe for now. At dawn she trudged to the office, trying to shake off the nightmares. Agnes found her nodding over documents. "Are you all right?" she asked. Bendu rubbed her temples. "I'm fine, just tired," she answered. Agnes studied her. "You might need more than words, Rondu. You need protection, a lawyer, someone who can make doors open for you." Bendu looked puzzled. "Agnes, why do you have that look on your face?" Agnes broke into a triumphant grin. "Because Calvin got me a lawyer from the best firm in town," she announced. Relief and a thrill of joy surged through Bendu. Calvin Daniels, her kind, steady friend, had arranged help. That night, Bendu returned home to find a miracle in her yard. The golden glow of torches lit up a palaver hut freshly built on her lawn, draped in fragrant tropical flowers. A small table covered in white linen was set for two inside. Nearby, a chef tended a charcoal grill, sending up delicious aromas. Bendu gasped in wonder as her heart raced. Calvin appeared at the gate, dressed in a crisp shirt and broad smile. "What are you doing in my yard?" she teased, laughing through tears of gratitude and surprise. Calvin lifted her in his arms and spun her around. "Just sweeping you off your feet," he said, twirling her toward the house. Bendu fluttered a little and squinted. Over the music of cicadas, she asked in mock seriousness, "Sweep me over the threshold." "I can't have that," Calvin chuckled. "Not yet," he said as he gently kissed her. The night's terror lifted, if only for a moment. Together they shared a modest but joyful dinner in the little hut beneath the stars. Food, music, and the sweet, comforting reassurance that someone cared deeply for her. The peace of that evening was short-lived. Unknown to Bendu, Commander Cobra had not forgotten her. As she celebrated quietly with family back at Pip on Sunday, Moses Varney, the man she knew only as Cobra from the war, was awake in Monrovia. He had assumed the alias Moses Varney, posing as an NGO worker who once taught law at the university, but in reality, he was planning a new rebel uprising. Varney's phone crackled with urgent news. Someone, somewhere was hunting him. In a rage, he cursed the girl who had discovered his motel address. I should have shot her, he raged. Meanwhile, Monday found Bendu fatigue creeping back as she went about her NGO tasks. Doors in the justice system still slammed in her face. The lawyer Calvin had secured, a partner at the best firm, reported that in Liberia the courts would do nothing without witnesses or proof. Each afternoon, Bendu tried the police station again, even meeting with Lieutenant Tarpa, a family acquaintance, but every time the answer was the same. No judge would touch a war criminal case. No one would be paid to do it, and Tarpa himself shook his head at the utter futility. Bendu sank into frustration. Could this truly be impossible? She glanced at the pile of proposals and reports on her desk. Projects needed funding. Staff needed guidance. By taking on Varney, she was already falling behind. On Wednesday, as rain pelted the Monrovia streets, Bendu dozed at her desk until Agnes gently shook her awake. Calvin called, Agnes said, suppressing a grin. He finally got you that lawyer. Bendu blinked sleep from her eyes. Calvin got me a lawyer. A bright candle had been lit inside her soul. Agnes nodded. From a big firm. He's picking us up tomorrow morning. Relief flooded Bendu. She told Agnes thank you and hurried home that evening. The taxi dropped her off at her gate, and she paid more than the fare to the driver with a grateful smile. When she came home, the courier of the evening was a different kind of surprise. Bendu had been so weary she forgot she had left the gate unlocked for a moment. Otherwise, she might never have seen it. A small white palaver hut stood in the middle of her front yard, its roof newly thatched, surrounded by glowing torches and an arch of crimson flowers. She could see through the open doorway, a table for two, and the flicker of candlelight dancing on white china. Calvin, Bendu whispered. She heard a rustle in the bougainvillea and turned. There he was, stepping out in a denim shirt and smiling like a mischievous boy. The scent of his cologne made her knees weak. You need a break after everything, he said softly, reaching for her hand. He swept her into his arms again, and for a moment the terror and anger of the past weeks could not touch her. But reality crept back in. Bendu gently set her feet on the ground. Thank you. This is wonderful, she breathed. Calvin laughed and opened the door for them to go inside. Just as they neared the threshold, the memory of dinner with the guards flared in Bendu's mind. She stopped him with a smile. I need to go wash my hands, she said, pretending. Calvin nodded, amused, and stepped aside. Bendu slipped inside, quickly dunked her hands in a water barrel on the porch, then strolled back out. I'm not easy, you know, she teased, closing the door gently between them. Thursday dawned with the deepest threat of all. Bendu's phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. Meet me at Elma Shaw on Carey Street. There was no signature, but the handwriting on the slip Bendu was given that day still burned in her mind. Moses Varney, ask for V. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Bendu and Calvin approached her house with caution. A brown sedan with tinted windows was parked in the shadows. Varney and his driver, Wea, watched from the darkness. Inside, Calvin opened the door at Bendu's call and comforted her by carrying the last tray of dinner. Outside the gate, Varney muttered in frustration. Bendu had run out of the house with 2 bodyguards when she saw the vehicle. Wea was behind the wheel, watching the road. Varney slid out of the back, cradling a pistol at his ankle. They were prepared for pursuit, as the guards emerged to chase after Bendu. Her voice ringed with terror. Varney hissed, past them. Drop me around the corner. The driver edged the car away and Varney melted into the night. For a moment Bendu's heart flooded with adrenaline as the taxi raced away from her home. She clutched her chest. Turning to her sisters and friends, She knew immediately what had happened. He came out. She gasped to Calvin, pointing. Calvin hadn't even turned around, having been talking with Agnes. He whipped about. In the fading light, they all saw Varney's shadowy figure slip around the corner. "Are you all right?" Calvin asked urgently. Bendu shook. I'm okay." Her eyes were wide. Agnes took her arm. "Bendu, come inside. We'll figure this out." The adrenaline ebbed, leaving a sick nauseous ache. Within moments, all of them were clustered in Bendu's living room. Agnes, Calvin, Sister Ciata, husband Terence Clark, and even old friends like cousin Rebecca. They looked at each other in fear and astonishment. No one had yet seen Varney clearly, but he had the reputation of being uncatchable. "Calm down," Agnes urged gently. "He must have just wanted to scare you." But Bendu's hands were still trembling. "He came right into Monrovia," she said. "He knows he's being hunted. And he's armed." Within the hour, the phone had rung at Peace in practice. Lieutenant James Tarpa had agreed to see Bendu at the late hour. Meeting him at the police station, Bendu showed him a photograph police had taken of Varney at the marketplace. The officers compared the photo to an old file, but Lieutenant Tarpa shook his head. "He's got friends in the wrong places," Tarpa said quietly. "If a suspect this dangerous walked into a police station, I wouldn't be sure anyone would actually charge him. No judge will put him away on mere hearsay." Bendu's fists clenched. "You're saying you won't arrest him?" "I'm saying that without witnesses or bodies, you'll get nowhere. You can't just accuse someone of lots of murders in the 1990s. Name one man he killed, and give me evidence. Otherwise, I'm burying this report in a drawer." Lieutenant Tarpa finally quipped. "It took a lifetime to make him, and only a moment to ruin him," Agnes blurted. "Commander Cobra is a criminal, and if you want to arrest him, it must be with one murder and one witness at a time. Do something. He tried to kill her tonight." Moses Varney waited in the shadows, watching patiently as Calvin drove away from Bendu's house. He checked his watch and told Wea to start the engine and switch on the headlights. It was a few minutes past 8 in the evening. The streets were mostly empty, sidewalks clear and traffic thin. To avoid attention, they had parked some distance away, hidden by darkness, but close enough to see the house clearly. Varney gave calm, clipped instructions. The moment the gate opened, Wea was to move. He estimated she would come out within 10 minutes. As they waited, Varney took a small plastic bag from his pocket, scooped out white powder with a fingernail, and inhaled it deeply. Just as he predicted, the gate swung open before 10 minutes passed. Bendu rushed out toward the street, to security guards following closely behind her. Varney sank lower into the back seat as Wea started the car and rolled forward. When Wea warned him that the guards were with her, Varney reacted instantly. He ordered Wea to pass them, drop him off around the corner, and return alone. Wea stopped once they were out of sight. Bendu had tried to stop the taxi, arguing with the guards at the same time. Varney told Wea to circle back quickly before another taxi arrived. If the guards insisted on coming along, Wea was to refuse them. Varney stepped out and began walking slowly. The weight of the pistol strapped to his ankle pressed against him as adrenaline surged through his body. His thoughts raced as he imagined where Bendu might be heading. He was sure she was too shaken to stay home. He intended to stop her and end her interference for good. Another car passed him, not Wea. He cursed under his breath, irritated by the delay. Candle-lit table markets lay ahead, and he did not want to go that far. He turned back, deciding it was too late to worry whether she would recognize him. He convinced himself she would not dare jump out and run. At last, headlights appeared. Wea pulled up with only one passenger in the back seat. Varney climbed in quickly. The moment Bendu saw him, she began screaming and tried to lock the door. Wea reached back, grabbed her shoulder, and dragged her down toward the floor. Varney pressed his hand against her throat, reached under the front seat, and pulled out duct tape and a blindfold. Wea drove slowly to avoid attention. Bendu fought fiercely, screaming and struggling despite Varney's grip. He shouted at her to shut up and slapped duct tape over her mouth. He pulled out his gun, sat upright, and pointed it at her. He demanded to know if she understood the trouble she had caused him. When she stared at him in terror and hatred, he struck her hard on the head with the gun. The blow echoed inside the car. Blood poured from the wound above her ear, and she struggled to remain conscious. We glanced back anxiously, warning Varney he would kill her, but Varney shoved his head forward and ordered him to focus on the road. He locked the door on her side, shoved the gun under the seat, blindfolded her, and tied it tightly. The fight drained out of her and she lay still on the floor. As they drove, Varney complained about how her actions had disrupted his plans. He snorted more cocaine while speaking. Bendu cried softly. He asked why she was crying and told her problems were about to end. They drove uphill toward the ruined remains of Sophie's, past dark, abandoned houses and overgrown yards. After a while, they turned toward the beach and parked facing the ocean. Moonlight reflected on the black water as waves crashed onto the shore. Varney got out, sat on the hood, smoked, and spoke casually about childhood memories of swimming in a nearby lagoon. He offered the joint to Wea, who refused, saying he wanted to leave war behind and live peacefully. Varney listened, but said nothing. Concerned that people might see them, we urged him to hurry. Varney told him to bring her. Wea pulled Bendu from the car. Her blindfold was soaked with blood. He led her to Varney. Varney ripped the tape from her mouth and shoved her into the sand. She screamed. He grabbed her throat, covered her mouth, noticed distant candlelights, and dragged her quickly toward the lagoon. At the water's edge, Varney forced her to sit facing the ocean. He warned her not to scream. He untied her blindfold, tied her hands behind her back, and told her not to look back. Bendu took in her surroundings, the rocks, the lagoon, the distant ship on the horizon. She smelled the strike of a match and marijuana smoke and felt dread settle in her chest. Varney cocked his gun and sat several feet away. We stood further back near the trees. Varney threatened her, saying he could kill her or she could drop the charges against him. When she spoke of how he had ruined her life and given her to Samson, Varney reacted defensively, insisting he had saved her life and suffered nightmares of his own. He spoke of his past, of dreams of studying law, of not wanting to be a fighter. The waves crept closer as they argued. Varney accused her of killing during the war, mocking her innocence. She shouted that he took her cousin Orlando and destroyed who she used to be. Water surged around her legs and knocked her down. He threatened her again, demanding she drop the charges or he would expose her past. Suddenly we had disappeared into the trees. Varney panicked, shouting for him. In his confusion, he reeled, screaming in anguish, throwing cocaine into the wind. Meanwhile, a wave knocked Bendu into the water up to her neck. As Varney rushed toward her, she slipped her tied hands from behind her back to the front. When she stood suddenly, she flung wet sand into his eyes. Varney dropped the gun, blinded, flailing in pain. As Wea returned, Bendu rushed forward, struck Varney hard at the neck with her bound hands, and knocked him unconscious. She grabbed the gun, aimed it at Wea, and ordered him to drag Varney up the beach. She forced him to cut her free, took the car keys, and fled. Avoiding shortcuts, she jogged along the dusty road until she reached Tubman Boulevard, pushing past fear and pain, driven only by the need to get away from Moses Varney and survive. Tarpo looked down dismissively. Right now, darling, I'm just telling you what's realistic. He folded his arms and motioned to the door. I'm not going to let you die for someone else's crimes. Bendu shot him a scowl and stormed out into the night. Shaken, she returned to Calvin's place, outside his little house off Tubman Boulevard. She collapsed into his arms in relief. Calvin had the perfect expression of anger on his face. What the hell happened to you? He asked when she managed to stammer something. She handed him the visitor's slip. It read simply Moses Varney. Murder, January 1991, with nothing else. Calvin snatched it and tore it up. We're going to a hospital, he ordered. You may not be safe until those bruises heal. On the drive to St. Joseph's Hospital, Bendu held a cold compress to the deep bump on her head. She told him exactly what had happened, from Varney's posing as a friendly old comrade to the moment he and his man put her in a taxi and disappeared. And I remembered. In time, she said. I took their keys so they couldn't just drive off. But they must have had a spare or something. Calvin listened quietly. He knocked you out? He asked. Bendu managed a brief smile. Yes, out cold. Calvin's eyes flashed. Good. Next time he might be less careless. Bendu's skin prickled with fear. She knew Calvin meant he would do more than just scare this man. She quickly pleaded. No, Calvin, please, no more violence. Just keep me safe. Calvin nodded, understanding her too well. I always will, Bendu, he whispered. The hospital ward was quiet except for the steady hum of machines. A young nurse cleaned and bandaged Bendu's cuts and bruises. The bump would fade in a day or two. Bendu lay back on the exam table, staring at the ceiling, exhausted. She felt an arm gently drape a soft blanket over her. Calvin was still there, tension in his shoulders. That night, after giving a statement with police Tarpa, who took the names of Varney's victims over her sobs, Bendu sat at home with her family. Her eye was nearly swollen shut from the blow to her head. She knew they all wanted answers about her ordeal. For a long moment, tears came to her eyes again, not from pain this time, but from the overwhelming rush of emotion and relief. She looked around at the faces of her father Benjamin, her mother Eva, sister Ciata, Terence, Calvin, Agnes. These were the people who loved her. She thought of Jonah's memory, of Granny May's last days, and then she exhaled deeply. It was time to speak the truth. Let me tell you what happened out there. Bendu began, voice soft but firm. It started years ago, long before Monrovia, back when, and so she began to recount everything, how the war had reached Duluma camp, how she was forced into the women's auxiliary, how she had become Samson's wife, the endless fear and brutality she endured, and the solidarity she found among the women of the base. She recalled how she had once defended herself so fiercely that her fellow fighters gave her the war name Lieutenant TKO, technical knockout, for the devilish right hook that had caved Samson's cheek in one night. She told them about Ma Masu, the gentle older rebel nurse who tended her wounds, about Hannah and Aretha, the teenage sisters who risked their lives to warn Bendu when danger came, and how in that savage world the women had become family, protecting each other when their men were drunk or absent at the front. Sitting in that room, with her hands still bandaged and her cheek tender, Bendu's voice softened as she spoke. I lost people I loved, she said quietly. We all did. I buried their ghosts inside me. When Varney showed up tonight, it felt like the war came back to close. Everyone listened. Agnes wiped away a tear. Ciata squeezed Bendu's hand. Calvin said nothing. He knew better than to speak. Benjamin and Eva nodded gravely, absorbing the truth of a war they had fled. In the calm darkness that followed, Bendu realized something else, something even larger than her wounds. She had survived, and now, with Jonah's smile in her memory and friends by her side, she would keep fighting for peace, this time against a living monster hiding in plain sight. The night passed. Outside, the street lamps of Monrovia blinked on one by one. The war had reached Liberia's streets again, but Bendu Lewis would not be silent. She had a name now for the evil that had marked her life, Moses Varney, and she would face it, no matter the cost. Part B. Bendu Lewis often called Bendu and her sister Ciata arrive at the offices of the Thomas and Reeves law firm in Monrovia. They have met with counsel Marlon Gray, a junior attorney assigned pro bono to Rendu's case. The law office is modern and cool, its windows overlooking the Monrovia skyline. From high above, Rendu can see the whitewashed buildings of power, the executive mansion, the Capitol, and the Temple of Justice. Up here they look solid and impressive. Rendu thinks of how deceptive that view is. From a distance it seems the government is working, but within those walls the nation's wounds are deep. A secretary leads Rendu and Ciata into Gray's office. Gray, an earnest young lawyer, has just heard Rendu's story of what happened to her on the beach at Mamba Point. Siada looks nervous as Rendu begins to speak again, but Gray urges her on. Now I can press real charges, Gray tells Rendu, recalling the brutal encounter she described with Moses Varney. Siada is momentarily confused. What do you mean, real charges? What charges were we talking about before? She asks. Gray explains that what Rendu originally reported to the police were the old, open-ended war crimes charges. With no tribunal or truth commission in Liberia, such charges are almost impossible to prove right now. Gray smiles wryly. Until there's something like a war crimes tribunal here, he admits, warlords can walk free too easily. But current crimes are easier. If your attackers did anything just last week or last month, we can build a case on that. Rendu stiffens. If you think I have no case, just tell me now, she snaps, and I'll tell Reeves to drop it. Gray is apologetic. He means that until the country sets up a tribunal or truth and reconciliation commission, Rendu's only hope is to charge Varney with something concrete he did after the war. Rendu had come to him grieving and outraged, not only by Moses Varney's attack, but by how Liberia let so many war criminals go free. She asks quietly, there is something, isn't there? Gray pauses, collecting himself, then apologizes again. It will be very hard to bring any warlord to justice, he says. Rendu looks out the window, fighting back tears. She remembers the long line of refugees she once fled in the bush. Now Gray gently prompts her to tell again what happened during the war that might still be relevant. Taking a shaky breath, Rendu begins the story she has never forgotten. She was a young girl, 19, fleeing from Duluma with her sick grandmother. The war had come back to their village, and Rendu and Granny May joined a 100-strong column of refugees on foot. They walked for 2 hot days, carrying their few possessions and children on their backs, trying to find safety. As they neared Johnsonville, they came upon a checkpoint guarded by a lone young fighter. A crowd of men, women, and children laden with jerrycans of water, bundles of clothes, and babies in wraps moved slowly forward. Rendu and Granny May were at the back, pushing Granny May's wheelchair along the dirt road. By the time they reached the barrier, the column was exhausted. The fighter who guarded the crossing was a boy no older than 16, in uniform but not high on drugs. Rendu's palms were sweaty as the line drew up before him. He had a rifle but was not acting crazy. For that moment, they dared to hope he might be merciful. He cocked the rifle casually and asked in Liberian English, "Where they going?" At first everyone fell silent. Rendu glanced at Granny May in the chair. The old woman looked gray and slumped over, too weak to answer. Then a brave young woman a few people ahead spoke up softly, saying they had been displaced by fighting. "Children, sick people," Rendu said, interjecting as well, to answer. The child soldier glanced at the heap of burdens and babbling refugees. For a tense moment nothing happened, and then he barked in a harsh voice, "Pregnant women." The crowd stiffened. Some of the women began to sob quietly. The fighter sneered and gestured. Only 2 of the young women out of hundreds stepped forward, their hands on their full bellies. The fighter grinned at them like it was a sick game. "Bet was your baby boy or girl, lady?" He taunted the elder of the 2. "Let's see who win." One of the pregnant women whimpered, clutching the boy in the line with her. A second fighter appeared behind Rendu and pushed through the crowd. Rendu could do nothing but watch in horror as he laid the barrel of his AK-47 against the first pregnant woman's stomach. "Boy or girl, lady?" he jeered. Before the gun could fire, an older man behind the line yelled, "Leave that woman." The young fighter turned to the shout, and Rendu saw the man's face. He was one of her grandmother's old friends, a man with heavy rings of age around his eyes. The man shouted the biblical words, "Look not at the speck in thy brother's eye." At the boy soldier, the fighter was taken aback and lowered his gun. Rendu realized quickly that the old man was the same Pape who had been left with them earlier in the flight from Duluma. He had told Rendu, "God go bless ya, baby," for not abandoning yo granny. Rendu felt grateful. The crowd hushed as the old man stepped to the front. He looked the boy soldier in the eyes and said, "Dis ain't right, son." The fighter, still jittery, finally waved them through. Rondu and the others hurried on. Shaking, Rondu glanced back one last time. The Pape stood alone by the barrier, head bowed in prayer for their safety. Rondu realized with a surge of relief that Granny May and the rest had been spared that day. Not everyone can say a soldier spared them, Rondu would later tell Gray. Back in the law office, the story hangs in the air. Gray is silent for a moment, digesting every grim detail. He runs a hand through his short hair. Siada's hand covers Rondu's, and Rondu squeezes it, grateful for support. Finally Gray looks up. "That's terrible," he says softly. "It should never have happened. No one should be treated like that." Rondu nods, but makes no reply. It was all too real in her mind. Gray gently closes his notebook. He will file these details away, but he knows that even now, without a special tribunal, bringing Moses Varney to justice will be a long, hard fight. He vows to try everything he can. After the meeting, Rondu and Siada walk downstairs into the parking lot. It is late afternoon. Siada looks tired, but Rondu feels an odd calm after telling her story. Siada gently asks about their brother Calvin's reaction to all of this. Earlier, he had offered help, but Rondu had put him off. Rondu says she will call their parents and Calvin later that evening. Her mind is preoccupied with what Gray will do next, and with the memory of the checkpoint. Siada says little. She can see how much pain her sister still carries. Late that night, exhausted from the day's emotions, Rondu falls asleep on the sofa in Siada's guest room. In her dreams, the past is alive once more. She dreams she is at Duluma base again, under the fierce midday sun. Rondu and other women are out in the bush chopping wood. The air is heavy with smoke and dust from the burned camp. Rondu feels a sudden pressure in her bladder and slips away from the group to use a patch of tall grass. As she crouches down, the distant sound of splintered laughter and drums fades behind her. She thinks, "I am free. I can escape." Without alerting anyone, Rondu leaps to her feet and runs. She races along a faint path through the exhausted tree line, leaving the camp far behind. Time passes uneventfully as Rondu strides through bush and savanna. The memory in her dream is sharp. 3 months pregnant with her baby, wounded by Samson's club, she cut her hair short to avoid recognition. In the dream, she feels light with hope, unburdened of Granny May and still carrying her sleeping baby in her belly. Orange wildflowers bloom all around. Pretty butterflies float in sunbeams. Rondu feels a strange calm, as if all is right with the world. Suddenly, as the hot sun begins to sink, Rondu in the dream sees smoke rising ahead. A small roadside market and village appear in a clearing. People mill about under wooden stalls. Relief washes through her. Food. Help? She thinks. But as Rondu approaches, a voice yells out, "Duluma spy." Duluma spy. Rendu's face twists in confusion. A group of villagers surges toward her. A heavy-set man and woman confront her at the first stall. Rondu raises her hands in a placating gesture, babbling that she is just lost, not a spy. But an onlooker screams, "Kill her! Kill her!" Before Rondu can react, the man grabs her hair and drags her to the ground. The villagers surround Rondu, beating her with sticks and ropes. Some kick at her. Rondu cries out, but no one stops them. Just as they are about to tear her apart, a commanding voice rings out, "Stop." Rondu looks up to see the old Pape from the river, leaning on a crooked cane, stepping through the throng. His voice is clear and strong. "They asking for help, y'all, not trouble." He shouts at the crowd in his rusty old English. The villagers pause and listen. "She not from your town. Leave her be," he pleads. Rondu hears this voice through the haze of fear and pain. Relief floods her. The Pape is alive. He remembers her. The villagers grumble but quiet down. The man who seized her scowls in surrender. An elderly woman gasps. The Pape approaches Rondu and lifts her gently. In the dream, Randu looks into the Pape's eyes and feels grace. He whispers to the villagers, the camp folks should find her, if that's their plan. The crowd slowly parts. A few angry men grab Randu's arms and start dragging her toward Duluma again. Randu tries to resist, knowing that going back is a fate worse than death. Her foot catches on a rock, and she lurches forward, powerless to stop. Then Randu wakes. The blue afternoon light filters through a curtain as she sits bolt upright. At first she is disoriented. The nightmare's terror still rings in her ears. But then she realizes, I survived. In the dream she was about to die. But at the last moment, the kind old man saved her. She exhales loudly with relief. For the first time in many dreams, she had not been captured. She had not been tortured again. Randu looks over at Siada, who sleeps quietly, unaware of the vision Randu just lived. Her knees shake beneath her. She feels the stitches on her scalp, her head still swelling from where Moses Varney had kicked her. It will heal, she thinks. She touches the bandages carefully, hoping her scars will not be too noticeable. Randu gets up and stretches her stiff legs. Through the window, she sees the full moon rising above the Atlantic, painting the water silver. The ocean's steady lap calms her remaining anxieties. She realizes she is not in her small house downtown. She is safe here in Siada's apartment in Mamba Point. The assault by Varney was horrifying, but sitting here now, under siblings' care, she is grateful. Outside, far in the distance, she can even hear faint strains of music drifting from the nearby bar. She allows herself a small smile. She will focus on getting strong and seeing justice come. Randu heads down the hallway calling for Siada and Terence. Nobody answers. She finds their living room empty except for magazines on the coffee table. She sits and rubs her eyes. This morning Siada told her that by the time officers arrived at the hotel where Varney had been staying King's Castle, Varney had run off. They said he slipped out before they could nab him. Siada had explained. Randu had held back panic as Siada talked about who might have tipped him off. Now, an urgent knock sounds at the front door. Siada hurries to answer. Moments later, Gray steps in, looking businesslike in shorts and a shirt. He carries his legal papers. Gray sinks into a chair. Good news and bad news, he says. Siada pours glasses of water. The bad news is, Varney gave us the slip. He's gone. Randu doesn't try to hide her anger. How did he know we were going to serve him? She snaps. Gray opens a file and reads from a note. He checked out of the hotel, left all his stuff behind. But his keycard and messages, we think someone warned him. Randu's eyes narrow. Gray looks up. The good news is, the woman who called in the tip said, quote, Don't worry, just tell my sister nothing spoiled. Randu recognizes the veiled apology. She smiles tightly. Gray and Siada both look puzzled. What does that mean? Siada asks gently. Randu simply shakes her head. She knows who let Varney slip away, but she does not say it now. Nothing spoiled, she repeats under her breath. Siada and Gray exchange anxious looks, but Randu rises and tells them she's going to bed. She needs to rest for what tomorrow will bring. On Monday afternoon, Randu returns to work at Peace in Practice Pip. In the foyer, she pauses to regard a photo on the wall. Liberian women and their sisters from Guinea and Sierra Leone marching together for peace, wearing black and white dresses and holding banners. The caption reads, Women of Liberia standing strong. Randu recalls that they had chosen black to symbolize grief and white for hope. But Randu's mind is heavy with bad news, not hope. She spent the morning at a meeting with international aid agencies. One funder after another is pulling out. USAID's project funding has been cut again. The Carter Center says it is leaving Liberia, and the local NGO that promised development grants just rejected PIP's proposal. Agnes, Randu's co-director, had predicted this. Development projects are being deprioritized as the rural war drags on. Inwardly, Randu repeats a mantra, we have to keep hope alive. Randu steps into the weekly group counseling session for young women who survived war. Josephine and Rosetta, two of the girls, stand up with big smiles when they see her. They had not seen Rondu since the attack. "Mama, you okay?" Josephine asks, and the other girls gather around Rondu. Tana, the usually quiet one, enters with startling news. "Guess what? I don't have TB. I have an infection. But it's not contagious." The room gasps and then cheers. Rondu is relieved. Tana had been coughing terribly, but it wasn't tuberculosis after all. Yet the session has turned electric with curiosity. Rosetta bellows, "We want the whole story. From the first time you saw him." The girls clap and wink at each other. Josephine and Rosetta exchange a knowing grin. They have been cooped up learning about forgiveness all week and now have a real live drama unfolding. Rondu laughs despite herself. All right, she says. "It's not going to be a 4-hour movie, I promise." She pulls up a chair. The girls settle, eager. Agnes stands back, letting Rondu speak. Rondu takes a breath. "I have to make a confession." She begins softly. "I was in shock when I faced this again. For all the counseling we do, I never thought I would have to actually do it myself." Rosetta nods and mouths for real, and Josephine clasps Rondu's hand encouragingly. Rondu clears her throat. "First thing I learned, you can't change what happened. Only how you respond to it. You remember what Sis Agnes always says, 'What doesn't kill me?'" The girls finish the phrase in unison. "Will make me stronger." Rondu smiles at them. "Right, that's it. You decide that you're coming out stronger." She leans forward. "When you come face to face with your past, like I did, first quickly assess, is there immediate danger? What are my options? Do I confront him, or just walk away? What will give me closure?" Agnes nods and restates what Rondu said in her own words for emphasis. Rosetta raises her hand, her full lips curved into a worried frown. "Does forgiving someone mean letting them get away with what they did?" she asks. Rondu closes her eyes for a moment. "I'm still wrestling with that myself," she admits. "You have to think of the context. What was happening around the person at the time? Did he hate me personally, or was he just following orders from others?" The counselor Agnes adds gently, "Consider what was happening around you at the time. Why did he do it? Was he really a monster, or forced by something bigger?" Rosetta shakes her head. "Nobody's forced to do anything," she mutters. Josephine jumps in, "But remember how scary it was in war. People were just doing what they thought they had to." Agnes clarifies, "You have to ask, even though bad things happen to me, how do I practice peace now?" Rosetta blinks. "So, we can't seek revenge?" she asks quietly. Rondu chuckles softly. "Revenge? No, peace isn't about revenge," she says. "For me, peace will come only if justice is done, not vengeance. Justice." Agnes then asks, "During the war, did any of you ever see a man being beaten or taken away?" "What did people say?" All the girls nod. Tana raises her hand, lips trembling. "They said, 'Don't ask questions, and just let it go.' They all remember that fear." Josephine's voice is small. "If you open your mouth," they said, "they'll carry you away too." She whispers. Agnes leans over. "Did any of you ever try to help those people being hurt?" she asks the circle. The girls shake their heads slowly, too afraid to intervene. Agnes sighs. "You see, some of us are guilty of the violence, and some of us are guilty of doing nothing," she says gently. The girls look ashamed. Rondu watches them, sympathetic. Josephine suddenly raises her hand. "What was the hardest part for you, Mama Rondu, when you saw that man again?" she asks. The question is direct, and Rondu's face tightens. She meets Josephine's eyes. "He knew things about my past that I had never told anyone," Rondu says softly. The girls lean in. "I had a baby during the war," Rondu says, hearing her own voice. "Her father was a rebel soldier. When she was born, I left her there and ran." Ah yeah. Rosetta gasps. Tenna and Josephine gasp, too. The group goes silent. Yes, Rondu whispers, tears in her eyes. I told my family only when I was in the hospital. Now it's all out. It feels like a burden lifted off my shoulders. She looks up. Sis Agnes always says, you can't let the past rule your future, but I was doing just that. Those secrets were hurting me more than anything. Silence falls. Then Tenna clears her throat. She looks pale and fragile. Sis Rondu, she begins hesitantly, you've really encouraged me. To tell you something, Rondu leans forward, encouraging. Tenna continues, you know I get sick a lot. I go to the hospital a lot for malaria, coughs, fevers, all kinds of things. Well, they tested me for HIV. Tenna's voice cracks. And it was positive. Josephine and Rosetta gasp again. So, you have AIDS, Rosetta whispers. Tenna nods. Agnes pushes in gently. Yes, the virus that causes AIDS. Tenna clarifies, hugging herself. The doctor says I've had it a long time, but only now my immune system is getting weak. Rosetta frowns. So, you'll just keep getting sicker? She asks. I have to take care of myself and eat good food. Tenna says, but I barely have money for food. Sometimes it's hard just to pay to come to class. There's no cure, Josephine says. Tenna shakes her head. There's medicine to keep it down. The hospital counselor says if more people with HIV talk about it, we can get others to avoid it, and help the government do more. Rondu feels something in her chest, a wave of pride and affection. I'm so sorry, she whispers to Tenna, gentle. Agnes nods. I'm not worried about you keeping it secret. Tenna says bravely, I don't want it to be a secret. If my story can help even one person, I will tell it. The other girls lean forward, supportive. Josephine grins and says, we will not leave you alone. Tenna, Bendu, Agnes, and the girls spend the next hour reassuring Tenna, education about transmission, finding medicine, staying strong. No one treats Tenna differently. She smiles and feels accepted. Rondu listens and thinks, this is our way out, openness and acceptance. She watches her friends, realizing just how powerful it can be when a community supports one of their own. In that moment, Rondu feels a small spark of the hope she needs. When the session ends, the group files out. Rondu and Agnes stay behind to tidy up. Rondu helps stack plastic chairs and wipes down the tables. Agnes is quiet, her mind still on Tenna's news and Rendu's ordeal. Finally, Agnes breaks the silence. You need to forgive him, she says abruptly, referring to Moses Varney. Rondu stops wiping a chair and flares at Agnes. What did you say? She hisses. You need to forgive, Commander Cobra. Agnes repeats gently. Rondu yanks her head around. Don't tell me what to do. Sis Agnes, she snaps. Agnes doesn't budge. I was only trying to help, she says softly. Rondu sighs and rubs her forehead. Look, she says, trying to calm herself. There were moments on the beach when I thought, maybe I could let it go. Maybe he seemed sorry. But then he'd do something else cruel and I would change my mind. She looks away. I'm not dropping the charges, Rondu says firmly. Agnes is quiet for a moment. Rondu adds, her voice softer. It's not that I don't want to forgive. It's just, I don't want to seem like I'm going back on what I believe, to the girls or the other victims. It feels like forgiving would make my struggle useless. Agnes listens intently. Finally, Agnes says, not at all. You've grown strong enough to see things differently. Forgiving isn't easy. Sometimes it's even harder than punishment. But it can be wiser in the long run. Rondu lowers her head. She replies quietly, it would be easier if he had changed. Some people did what they had to survive. Others, they were just evil. Agnes asks gently, who are we to judge which he was? Rondu glances up. I don't know. Look at what he did to me, she says angrily. Agnes nods. Yes, she agrees. Rondu sighs. Still, Agnes continues. Think of all the energy you've spent chasing Cobra down. What if, You put that into something else instead. Rondu doesn't respond. Agnes sees Rondu tense. I'm going to give you an assignment, she says, breaking the silence. Rendu's eyebrows lift. Write a letter, either to Commander Cobra or to Samson, or whoever you feel you need to talk to. Pour your heart out, it might help you sort your feelings. Rendu's face softens. Maybe, that could help, she concedes. Agnes smiles. I thought you might say that. Rondu nods and starts toward the door. Wait a minute, Agnes calls. Rondu turns back, curious. Agnes looks a bit shy. I have an idea, she says, easing onto a couch chair. You know how we asked the girls to write letters? Well, I was thinking, maybe we could start a truth project here at PIP. Rondu sits down again. A truth project. How? First, Agnes says, we invite anyone, victims and perpetrators, to come to the center and talk about what happened to them. In front of counselors and community leaders. Anyone who wants to tell their story, or explain why they did what they did, or ask forgiveness. Rendu's eyes shine with understanding. By the time Agnes has outlined the details, group circles, safe space, even optional mediation if both sides agree, Rondu is nodding vigorously. This is exactly what they could do here. She grabs Inez's hand. This is brilliant, Rondu says, smiling. A chance for healing, Agnes adds quietly. Night falls and Rondu finally heads home. She steps into the quiet dining room of the apartment in Mamba Point. On the table is a vase of brilliant red roses. Rondu blinks in surprise. A card is pinned to one stem, with Calvin's writing. Sweet Bendu, hope you're feeling better. Love always. Calvin. Rondu stares, touched beyond words. Siada, sprawled on the sofa, laughs softly when she sees Rendu's expression. Flowers from Calvin, she says lightly. Rondu picks up a flower and inhales. Calvin. He used to be so in love with me back when we were kids. She muses. Siada watches her quietly. How come you two never got together? She asks gently. Rondu answers softly. He was my cousin Benjamin's best friend. After Benji died, he felt like another brother to me. I just didn't see him in any other way. Siada changes the subject as she rises for bed. Terrence got in late last night. He's touring all over the city, telling people about his plumbing business. She jokes. Then her tone grows earnest. I don't know how you can joke about it. He knows Cobra is loose and could strike at any moment. Rondu raises a hand. I've been thinking about it all day, she admits. Maybe Moses Varney is dangerous, but my anger has calmed. I'll still let Gray pursue him, but I want to focus now on finding our daughter. Siada frowns. Bendu, what if she didn't survive? Rondu gently wipes Siada's arm. Even if, she says steadily, it is possible she's alive. I have to try. She notices Siada's eyes welling. It'll be hard, Siada murmurs. And what if baby girl doesn't even want to know her mother? Rondu pulls off her shoes and starts toward her bedroom, already thinking through a plan. I thought of that, too, but she's my daughter. I have to know, on impulse. Rondu kneels and hugs Siada. I'm going to look for her, with or without help, and I want to use every tool. Siada finally says quietly, You're crazy. You know. Rondu smiles to herself. Maybe she is a bit. A flood of feelings wells up in her, the unresolved pain, the desire for justice, the love for a child she never met, and now the strange thrill of hope. She calls out behind her, I'm going to see the Red Cross first thing tomorrow. On Tuesday morning, Rondu takes a taxi to the International Committee of the Red Cross office on Bushrod Island. She steps out and pauses before a tall white fence covered with a mural. Painted there is a scene of war refugees being forced from their homes by armed men. A caption begs fighters to respect civilians' rights. Scenes like this played out across Liberia during the war. Rondu thinks, how many times have villagers been driven away? For 12 years, Liberia has known nothing but war. She shows her ID to the guard and is directed to the tracing department. The hallways echo under fluorescent lights. Rondu is nervous as she enters a small office. A young man with a kind smile greets her. He introduces himself in a friendly voice. "Hi, I'm Gabriel, a tracing assistant. Please, sit down." Rondu glances around. The room is lined with tall cabinets stuffed with files from Liberia and surrounding countries. Rondu swallows as Gabriel hands her a form. The front reads, "Tracing request for missing person." Rondu reads the questions. Name, date of birth, parents' names, year and place of separation. Her hands tremble as she writes. When he asks for her daughter's name, Rondu stares at the blank line. Tears come to her eyes. "Baby girl," she whispers, realizing she doesn't even know a proper name. "Is everything all right?" Gabriel asks gently. Rondu snaps out of her thoughts. "My daughter," she says, voice shaky. "She was just called baby girl. We didn't even have a name for her. She was only 2 weeks old when the rebels took me. 1992. She tells Gabriel this, recalling the train of her memory. Gabriel blinks, concerned. "That was a very young baby. And you're only trying to find her now, after so many years," he prompts. Rondu shrugs. "The war, everything," she says. "I almost didn't believe she could still be alive." Gabriel's face is sympathetic. He says softly, 9 years is a long time." Rondu blinks back tears. "So, what made you come today?" he asks quietly. Rondu steels herself. "I think she might still be out there," she says. "I may have someone who can help us find her." Rondu takes from her purse the names Mamusu, Hannah, and Aretha, the women from Duluma who cared for her baby after it was born. They may have taken her out of camp. They might know. Gabriel's eyebrows lift. "Mamusu and her daughters. We have them in our files," he says, thinking. "If any of them knew about your child or brought her to a camp, we might trace them too. We have a system." He suggests sending Red Cross messages, official letters carried by Red Cross animators, to try to reach Mamusu and the others. Rondu nods and hastily fills out the message forms, one for Mamusu, one for Hannah, one for Aretha. She pours out what she knows. "This is Rondu. You are the women who helped me in Duluma. If my baby is still alive with you, please tell the Red Cross." She also completes what she can of the tracing request, leaving blanks where she has no information. Gabriel assures her this is fine. "We will enter what we have into the database. Then we will check if anyone registered your daughter as an unaccompanied child," he explains. Rondu thinks of all those children torn from parents in the chaos. Thousands of files line these drawers. Perhaps one is the listing for her baby. Gabriel says that after inputting her data, the office will send the messages through the Red Cross camp network. The animators in the Liberian refugee camps would be instructed to find anyone who fits those descriptions or to follow any leads. Rondu, still quiet, asks about timing. Will she need to call back? Wait anxiously. Gabriel shakes his head. "We will call you," he promises. "If you have a phone, we'll use it. Otherwise, a caseworker will come every few months to report progress." Rondu stands to leave. She asks, "So I just wait now?" Gabriel smiles kindly. "Yes, if it's meant to be, it will happen." Rondu tries to take that in. "It's been almost 10 years, she says. "I don't know if I can wait 10 more minutes." Gabriel laughs softly. "Try," he suggests. "In the meantime, you can pray." As Rondu walks out of the ICRC building into the afternoon sun, her mind whirls. She has done everything she can. If the women had registered the baby with the Red Cross when they escaped Duluma, maybe a record will show up. Or if they kept her, perhaps this simple letter might reach them. Rondu feels a pang imagining her child, a 9-year-old girl somewhere, with questions and maybe pain of her own. A mother's heart breaks at the thought either way. She thinks of the little boy Agnes adopted and wonders if his mother ever searched for him. What if Rendu's daughter has been someone else's daughter for all this time? The day is waning as Rondu steps away from the Red Cross gate. She clutches the bouquet she had bought to give Gabriel in thanks. Now, I wait, Rondu murmurs, almost to herself. Later that evening, on the other side of Monrovia, Moses Varney sits alone on his bed in a secure safe house. Varney is Commander Cobra, the dreaded warlord of Duluma. He stares transfixed at the television. Once again the horrific images of New York City's September 11th attacks play on the screen. Planes flying into the Twin Towers, screams, smoke. Now the towers tumble down. Varney feels a jolt in his gut. The big screens show the faces of the suicide pilots. Varney, mouth agape, takes a swig of cold beer. In shock, he mutters to himself, the mightiest power on earth. Brought to its knees, he sips and shakes his head. The broadcasters speak of revenge and catastrophe. Varney closes his eyes. He thinks of the hijackers as men who believed in a cause enough to die. Just like in war, he muses. They gave up their lives thinking they did something great. But then he remembers the innocent civilians they killed and wonders, in their minds, was it okay? Did they believe God would forgive it, as Varney had once done evil for a cause? News of the attack swirls around him. One channel says no forgiveness for traitors. Varney turns up the volume on a news bulletin. A reporter is speaking of a one-person truth commission in the hereafter, sarcastically comparing it to a final judgment. Varney grimaces, a personal judgment. They all end the same way, he thinks. He curls up on the bed and stares at the ceiling. For days now, since leaving Gray's Landing on the beach, the news of world events has haunted him. Varney pours out another line of his small bag of cocaine on a side table. He snorts it quickly. If this is my punishment. He chuckles to himself, rolling over. I don't mind it. He's been locked in this guarded safe house since Mercy and the government caught up with him. They promised he would be safe, so he's got beer, cables for satellite TV, even air conditioning. In 3 days he's barely moved. No interrogation. For now, the government seems more interested in the arms deal. Varney surveys his room. On the desk is a hand-drawn map of Monrovia and its checkpoints. He was supposed to transport the next arms shipment, but after today's events, everything is on hold. The plot to smuggle guns to Taylor's forces is being delayed. Varney sighs. Suddenly, an intrusive thought. Why didn't I kill that girl? He mutters, referring to Rondu. She practically forgave me. But she kept going with this case. He feels a pang in his chest. Am I a monster? Or was I sometimes right? He recalls hearing the screams of men and women, people he put out of their misery in Duluma. He remembers children crying at the sight of him. The nights he wanted to scream, look at me. I am human too. In moments like this, Varney realizes how often he cried himself in his bunk, forcing out silent sobs. No one ever hugged or loved him. He had not been a child soldier. He was in his 20s. He remembers his childhood, living with his abusive uncle and aunt after his parents died. His aunt beat him. He learned to pick pockets in the street as a child just to survive. Then Boys Town, a reform school run by the Jesuits in Chieflin, had taken him in. He could go to school and learn. That should have been his road to redemption. Varney thinks bitterly. Instead, he had joined the revolution. Varney lies back and sighs. In the moment, he wanted to die for a cause. He thinks of the hijackers. He almost laughs. No traitors in a revolution, he mutters, echoing their slogans. He had once said that to his rebels when they tried to escape. Varney's eyes narrow. No traitors. Now Varney considers. Am I a traitor too? He didn't surrender. They surrounded him. If he had not caught those dozen Duluma youths planning to betray him, maybe none of this would be happening. He shakes his head. No, I was doing the work. And traitors deserved death. He remembers thinking as he had executed a captive before all the cadets. He checks his watch. It's nearly midnight. The TV channels switch to round-the-clock terrorism coverage. Varney flicks off the set and reaches under his pillow for a bottle of whiskey, pouring a quick shot. He then lies back on the bed, exhausted and restless. The room is silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of Monrovia's nightlife. Varney hears echoes of his own past in the news reports, images of collapsed towers, of leaders vowing vengeance. He turns on his side, covers his face, and forces himself to sleep. In dreams, the war still lives. In the quiet darkness, Varney's thoughts drift to what awaits him, a trial, a sentence. He reminds himself that for now he is under house arrest, not prison. At least, he has momentary peace. Tomorrow, he will have to face his fate. The jungles of his memories swirl around him as he finally drifts off, a commander haunted by ghosts of war. Part C. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon when Bendu Lewis, her older sister Siada, and Siada's husband Terence relaxed together in the apartment Bendu was now calling home in Monrovia's Mamba Point neighborhood. They had just enjoyed a hearty Sunday brunch: hot buttered cornbread, eggs and bacon, boiled plantain and cassava, fish and spicy tomato onion gravy, fresh orange juice and fruit salad. But Bendu had overindulged and spent the meal daydreaming. She was looking forward to meeting her friend Calvin later for dinner at the Beirut restaurant, and even though she had promised herself a light lunch, the food proved tempting. Now she was stretched out in a recliner, fully sated, listening to jazz and waiting for the evening. Overhead, Ella Fitzgerald crooned softly from the speakers as Terence rose to browse the CD stack for something new. Bendu smiled as Siada teased about her date with Calvin. When Siada slyly asked where Bendu planned to sleep that night, Bendu snapped playfully that she'd stay alone in the guest room, much to Siada and Terence's amusement. For a moment, the three of them were a picture of domestic comfort, a loving sister with her husband and her talented younger sister, Alice, home from years abroad. In that easy scene, Bendu imagined growing old with Calvin and wondered quietly if that was what she wanted. Their peace broke a moment later when the housekeeper, Sarah, appeared carrying a stack of newspapers. Bendu noticed Sarah looked troubled. She was supposed to toss those week-old dailies. Curious, Bendu insisted on taking the papers herself. The afternoon sunlight gleamed on the glossy tabloid front pages: The Inquirer, The News, The New Liberia, Poll Watch, and Monrovia Guardian, each just 1 or 2 weeks old. Bendu flipped through them idly, scanning headlines. Most of the stories were solidly familiar: rebel attacks on government forces, snippets of local politics, ads for workshops, and in one paper sports news. She nearly tossed them all aside, but then one story caught her eye and froze her blood. Siada, Bendu whispered to Siada. What? Siada cried, grabbing the paper and reading the bold headline out loud. Bendu could only point at the article. She was too shocked to speak. The newspaper screamed, "Body of victim identified. The body found on Monday in the St. John River has been positively identified as that of Moses P.N. Varney." Varney was the politician who had brutally attacked Bendu just weeks earlier at night. Now he was dead, shot in the head, according to the coroner's report. The city police still did not know whether it was murder or suicide, the article said. Terence scoffed without looking away from his ice cream. He killed himself, he declared in an offhand way, as if he were commenting on the weather. Bendu felt her head swim. "Stop it," she gasped. "This is too much." "What's today's date on that paper?" Siada checked the dateline. "Wednesday, September 19th, she said. Bendu did the math. If Varney's body was found on Monday, and it was Wednesday now, that meant he was killed 2 days ago. And it was September 19th on the paper. And today is Sunday, the 24th, Bendu said quietly, more to herself than anyone. "Why haven't the police contacted me or my lawyer? They know we've been looking for him." She looked up at Terence, hurt that he had not mentioned this to her earlier. Terence blinked, as if realizing something for the first time. I don't read that paper," he mumbled, shifting on the sofa. Siada made a face at him. "You buy them for the photos, don't you?" she teased. Bendu shook her head. It suddenly felt like the world was tilting. They knew Varney had been loose, perhaps supplying arms in Monrovia, and now he was dead. She glanced at her sister. What if they did it? What if the government killed him? Siada raised her eyebrows. Killed who? Them. Don't be ridiculous. Terrence turned from the refrigerator, holding two cartons of ice cream as a peace offering. He's dead. Rondu, be happy and move on. You wanted him killed, remember. The laugh in his voice made Rendu's skin crawl. No, she snapped, rising and nearly knocking over a magazine stand as she paced. Of course I didn't want him killed. I just wanted him to stay away from me. Terrence leaned against the wall, smiling smugly. Well, he's dead now, so you don't have to worry. You can even go back home if you want. He mockingly flung his arms wide. It's fine by me. Rondu could only gape at him. She trembled with anger and hurt. With a harsh laugh, she turned away. You are missing the point, Terrence, she said coldly. You women always want to dig deep. Looking for what? I don't know. Well, I'm done with it. He flicked his cigarette lighter and hurried out the front door to cool off. Siada glared at Terrence's retreating back. Rondu sank back into the recliner, clutching the newspaper. And you mean to tell me Terrence didn't even see those stories? She asked, voice shaking. Siada crossed her arms. Apparently not, she said. Maybe he's been too preoccupied lately. Rondu felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. She had come home expecting comfort, but instead heard that her attacker was gone, and that Terrence didn't care. She closed her eyes for a moment. What if I hadn't picked up those papers today? She wondered. The question sent a chill through her. By now it was time to get ready for her dinner date. She stood up, smoothing her nerves. She treated herself to a warm bath. Steam filled the bathroom and Rondu felt some of the tension drain out of her. She changed into a simple African print dress with a matching jacket and put on a small mask locket, an heirloom piece she thought of as a symbol of protection. Rejoining her sister and husband in the living room, Siada exclaimed at how cute Rondu looked. Terrence even said she looked very pretty and offered her ice cream from Sharks as a truce. But Rondu barely noticed the sweet taste. Her stomach churned too much from the morning's news. Rondu glanced at the clock. It was 20 to 7. Time to leave. She picked up the wrinkled newspaper, determined to take it with her to dinner and explain everything to Calvin in person. Don't bother with the intercom, she told Siada. I'll just run down to let him in. Terrence tugged at Rendu's sleeve. Good luck, sis, he said with a false grin. As Rondu hurried down the stairs in her high heels, she almost bumped into two police officers standing in the Mamba Point lobby. She realized they were waiting for someone. Bendu Lewis, one of the officers asked when she passed. Before she could answer, the officer pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. We have a warrant for your arrest, he said flatly. Rondu reeled back, heart hammering. She whirled and saw the second officer had already started forward. Is this some kind of joke? She demanded. Just then a loud banging came from outside the lobby door, Calvin, on the other side, shouting her name. Relief flooded Rendu's chest as she rushed to the front desk. Send him up. Hurry, she cried. The receptionist let Calvin enter, and he reached her side instantly. His broad frame eclipsed the officer's. What's going on here? He growled. The first officer straightened. We have a warrant for this woman's arrest, for the murder of Moses Varney, he announced. Calvin's face went ashen. What? Rondu, what did they say? I didn't do anything to him, Rondu sobbed, already shaking. Calvin said to the officers, there must be a mistake. Take off the handcuffs. The officers frowned at Calvin's calm authority. Why don't you mind your own business? The younger cop sneered, reaching for Rendu's arm. Don't you dare touch her, Calvin barked, grabbing Rondu to his side. Terrence and Siada, who had heard the commotion and ran down, flanked Calvin protectively. She's done nothing wrong, Siada snapped. Let her go, or I'll make you regret it. The older policeman showed his badge again. Miss Lewis, you are wanted for questioning in a murder case. You must come with us. Rondu stood trembling, refusing to budge. On what grounds? We have been searching for that man for months. Calvin demanded. Take me, not her. Before the cops could respond, another woman in a dark suit appeared behind them. Leave her alone, she said. Rondu recognized her immediately as Counselor Grace Reeves, a lawyer who often defended activists. She had come with a young associate, Cass Gray. Reeves flashed her badge at the officers. This is completely wrong, she said to the men, stepping between them and Rondu. Miss Lewis was on our side. What evidence do you have? The only thing I see is that someone just got shot. Down the hall, the sound of heavy footsteps announced an authoritative presence. Chief of Police Edwin Kessley himself. Reeves smiled wryly. Well, this is better than I expected, Rondu thought. Kessley's jolly face appeared. After exchanging hearty Liberian handshakes with Reeves and friendly slaps with Calvin, he turned to Rondu and the others. Is my lovely Mrs. Clark all right? We just want to talk to her, that's all, he explained cheerfully. Lieutenant Tarpa will have some questions. Miss Lewis is not being formally arrested. We just invited her here to clear things up. Ciata quickly took out her cell phone. Chief, may I have your number? In case we need to call, she said, trying to hide her anxiety. Kessley handed her a card with a wink, saying he'd make sure she could call at any time. Greetings to your husband, he added before departing. Even the police chief was on friendly terms with them, Rondu noted in disbelief. By midnight, after hours in a small holding room, Rondu finally got some rest on a hard bench. Calvin and Ciata refused to leave her side. When Lieutenant Tarpa arrived at dawn, Rondu was led into his Stark interrogation office alone. He had an M16 armed guard posted at the door. Tarpa turned from his files as she entered. His cold eyes narrowed. We meet again, he said pleasantly, though Rondu did not share his tone. He began with her weapon status. Do you own a weapon, Miss Lewis? He asked. No, Rondu replied firmly. He flipped open a file and frowned at a photograph inside. When did you last see Moses Varney? He asked. Rondu hesitated, then said the only time she'd seen him was 3 weeks ago on the night he attacked her. Tarpa's face showed surprise. 3 weeks? Huh? He muttered, tapping his pen. He asked calmly if she was angry that Varney was dead. Rondu glared. Of course I'm angry. But I did not kill him. Tarpa's expression went from irritation to suspicion in a heartbeat. He pressed. Angry enough to kill him. I already told you. I did not kill him. Rondu snapped, eyes blazing. Tarpa sat back with a thin smile. Look, Miss Lewis, if you were innocent, you wouldn't waste my time, he said quietly. He then asked where she had been the past Saturday afternoon and evening, and Sunday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. Rondu replied that on Saturday she had been at the Palm Hotel's rooftop restaurant with Calvin the very date she had skipped to comfort her sister, and Sunday afternoon she had been resting at home. When Tarpa asked for receipts or anyone to confirm, she said Calvin and her family could easily be asked. Tarpa tapped his pen thoughtfully and then announced sternly, You will remain in our custody until this investigation is complete. A tear slid down Rendu's cheek. As he finally closed her file, Tarpa leaned forward and quietly added, Who's laughing now, Miss Lewis? The taunt stung. She glared at his back as he moved to his next task. Rondu spent the morning under tight police escort. Lieutenant Tarpa eventually admitted that the evidence against her was flimsy. By late morning, Tarpa relented. In front of the police station staff arriving for work, he informed Rondu that he would allow her to go home on her own recognizance, but promised, We'll be in touch. As Rondu left the station, tears streamed down her face. Calvin wrapped her in his arms on the curb and held her tightly. I'm so sorry this happened to you, he murmured against her hair. Ciata stood beside them, trying not to cry in front of Rondu. Rondu drew herself up and wiped her eyes. The anger from the night and the questioning was fading. What remained was just exhaustion. The drive back to their apartment was quiet. Rondu stared out the window at familiar buildings she had come to rely on. Suddenly she spoke in a small voice. I'm moving back to my own place. The word startled both Calvin and Siada. "What do you mean?" Siada demanded softly. "Why? Can't you wait until all this is finished?" But Rondu was already resolved. "No," she said firmly. "I've made up my mind. Terence was right. Varney is gone, and I have nothing to fear anymore." Calvin began to protest too, that Rondu shouldn't live alone at such a turbulent time. But Rondu shook her head. "Stay here as long as you like," she said serenely. "I'm going home." It broke their hearts to see her so determined. They let her be. Back at the apartment building, a ringing telephone caught Siada's attention. It was Terence's line. Siada hurried to pick it up, pressing the button to check his missed and dialed calls. Rondu asked what she was doing. "Last 10 calls," Siada said quietly. Rondu waited anxiously, watching her sister's face tighten. Siada tapped a few times and then set the phone down, face pale. She wouldn't meet Rendu's eyes. "What is it?" Rondu finally asked. Siada just shook her head. "Nothing," she murmured, but the worrying showed. Rendu's heart sank. She didn't pry, but knew something was wrong. "Are you sure you still want to move back home?" Siada asked gently. Rondu nodded. "Yes, you and Terence need to talk, and I can't be in the way." The next morning, Rondu returned to her own family home in Sinker. The security guards at the gate were now alert to her presence. When she drove up with Siada's help, one said with a grin, "We're on special alert for rogues now, boss." She found that much of the place was just as she had left it, except the courtyard palaver hut. The little romantic gazebo was gone. Inside, she noticed a vase of wilted flowers on a table. Her last present for a child that never came was rotting. Rondu sighed. She dragged her suitcase to her bedroom, resisting the urge to collapse on the bed and sleep for days. Instead, she methodically checked and locked every door and window. With trembling hands, she stood at the threshold of the second bedroom, the one she had prepared for her baby girl. For a moment Rondu let herself imagine what baby girl would like: pink ruffles at 10 years old, a patchwork quilt of flowers, a music box, teddy bears, but her heart clenched. She didn't even know if the girl was alive. She asked herself what if the tracing had found her, but she refused to give in to hope or despair. Rondu turned away, swallowing tears. At the kitchen table she found her cell phone and called Agnes, her longtime friend and co-worker. "Rondu, I was just about to call you." "Did you see the article on Tena?" Agnes cried. Tena was the young woman who, having been raped in the war, was now living openly with AIDS and working as a peer counselor at PIP. Rondu shook her head. "It's out," Agnes exclaimed, "and in style. Rondu, every paper and radio station is calling us. The health ministry wants to meet. Even some big names want to do interviews." Rondu felt her chest fill with pride. The evening's news brought a smile. Donors had also called PIP, offering support. "Yes," Agnes clapped. "This will be our saving grace." Rondu blinked away the satisfaction. It was true that the World Journal and other media piece on Tena had given peace in practice a surge of attention. "You and Calvin did great," Agnes praised. Rondu laughed softly. "Me, I just happened to be in the right place." Hanging up, Rondu realized her emotions were in turmoil. On one hand, she was thrilled that their work was finally recognized and might truly get help for Tena. But on the other, her heart still raced from the thought of Varney's death and the police ordeal. She felt a new regret that she had never truly forgiven Moses Varney while he lived, not for herself, but because he'd been a victim of war too. The looming fear that her family might think she had something to do with this shamed her. And worst of all was the thought of the child she left behind. Was baby girl even alive? Was anyone looking for her? Overwhelmed by exhaustion, Rondu fell onto her bed and let the tears come. She cried as if all the grief of her past, her anger, her frustration, poured out. Siada had been right. Sometimes pain demanded its own way, and Rondu needed this release. When finally there were no more tears left, she felt strangely peaceful. When she rose the next morning, Rondu felt a quiet determination. She washed up and then filled a pot with water from the barrel behind the house, lighting the stove to boil it. In the living room, she noticed how dusty the furniture had become. She retrieved her small collection of Madonna and Child statuettes, carvings of the Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus, and carefully wiped off the dust. These figures had always comforted Rondu, and today their presence reminded her of hope beyond suffering. She returned them to their shelf. Then Rondu sat on the couch and closed her eyes. For a long moment she let her mind wander to happier memories, Calvin telling her the day before that he loved her and would help her overcome anything. He had promised he would wait for her, fight every impatient cell in his body if she needed time. Those words, spoken quietly at the police station when Seada stepped out, suddenly meant a lot. Rondu imagined Calvin across the ocean in Sierra Leone, having followed the war crimes trials. She had told him last month that they should just be friends, and he left feeling rejected. Maybe, she thought, this physical distance would let him consider what he truly wanted. Putting down her dreams, Rondu stood and surveyed her home as if it were a ship's deck she was restoring after a storm. She lifted the old wooden mirror that Varney had broken in anger months ago and placed it back above the bathroom sink. Finally, standing up straight in front of that mirror, Rondu looked herself in the eye and smiled. She saw the woman who had survived Duluma, who had come through so much. The scar on her forehead was nearly faded. Today, her inner wounds seemed a little more healed too. Weeks went by. Lieutenant Tarpa never contacted Rondu again about the Varney case. His threat had turned out to be just that. Still, each time the doorbell rang or a shadow fell outside her house, Rondu couldn't help flinching. Every day her thoughts lingered on baby girl. Did the girl's mother know where to find her? Had they given up the search or contacted ICRC? She reminded herself that the tracing process could take months or even years. Work at peace in practice occupied her. The counseling center had grown to nearly 50 regular clients. Anez's idea for a truth project had blossomed. Volunteers from the community served as stand-ins for perpetrators and victims, taking turns in role plays to allow survivors to face or forgive the memory of those who hurt them. Rondu sometimes acted as a surrogate, listening to survivors' pain and showing the kindness of reconciliation. The exercises were emotional, but healing for everyone. Life outside also moved forward. Rendu's own family and friends were busy with their lives. Rondu had not seen Seada or Terence since that morning she decided to leave. One Saturday morning, however, Seada showed up at Rendu's door unexpectedly. She looked upset and flustered. "I have to tell you something," Seada blurted the moment Rondu let her in. "I think Terence was the one who got you arrested." Rondu froze. "What, my own brother-in-law?" She sat them on the couch. Seada sat rigidly beside her, phone in hand. "You already know I saw his number in the call list and the dialed numbers on his phone, both incoming and outgoing," Seada whispered. "He called Chief Kessley's number that morning after you were released." Rondu felt the room spin. Terence had lied. He had not forgotten all ties with the police chief. "Why would he do that?" Rondu asked, heart pounding. Seada's eyes filled with anger and hurt. "I don't know. Maybe he hates seeing us happy," she said, voice trembling. "I even heard him on the phone with a woman last week. It sounded serious." She shook her head. "I didn't want to believe it, but I saw it in his call logs." Rondu squeezed her sister's hand. The betrayal burned. That morning, after Rondu had stormed out with Carol and then apologized with ice cream, Terence had never explained himself. Now they saw why he had been moody and secretive. Just then Seada asked, as if reading Rendu's mind, "Do you still love him?" Rendu's eyes filled. She took a deep breath. "Honestly, I don't know, but that's not even the point." The sisters sat in silence, letting the hurt out. Finally, Seada placed a cushion on Rendu's lap. "I know what I'd do if I were you," Seada said gently. "Forget him. You deserve better." But Rondu surprised her. "It's not about Terence," Rondu said, touching her forehead, still tender from where Varney had struck her. "It's about Mommy and Daddy." Siada looked confused. What about mommy and daddy? Randu felt tears burn her eyes. All these years, they've looked at me as if I'm cursed. They always treated me like something bad happened because of me. She blinked. I thought they blamed me for Granny May's death. In disbelief, Siada reached over. No, Bendu, no. They never blamed you for Granny May. Randu shook her head fiercely, but I saw the way they acted. How Mom and Dad looked at me after that. And Orlando left. I thought I was the reason. Siada gently cupped Rendu's face. Listen, she said softly. You're not responsible for what happened. In fact, they feel guilty. They just never knew how to talk about it. They never asked you about it because they were afraid. They watched other people's stories, and seeing it from your eyes was too hard. Rendu's knees felt weak. Siada held her as the big sister. Mom was crying every day after we found out about Granny May, even though she wouldn't admit it. Dad looks so lost sometimes, but not because of you. They love you. Bendu, we all love you. Siada smiled gently. All at once Rendu's tears spilled over. She sobbed into Siada's shoulder, weeping for herself and for all the years of misunderstanding. It was as if the dam in her heart had finally broken. Aunt Rebecca, Cousin Rebecca, had been writing to her, telling her she was proud and that she forgave her, and Randu felt that forgiveness now with Siada's words. They even said Uncle Orlando was partly my choice. Randu choked out, thinking of another painful childhood memory. They think it was my fault, he ran away. Siada hugged her tighter. That's not true. Rebecca told us she forgives you. Even if we don't understand, there are things we can't change. Good or bad decisions. Sometimes it just happens. You did what you had to do to survive. Randu swallowed. Rebecca forgave me, even after all I did. She asked. She wrote that. She said it was okay. Siada nodded. Completely. She loves you like a mother. She's been waiting for you to believe it. Randu finally smiled through her tears. They looked at each other, sisters united, weeping for each other's pain and relief. In that moment, Randu felt the heaviness in her heart lift just a little. As Siada tugged a loose thread from Rendu's hair, she exclaimed, Your scar's barely visible. Look how much you've healed. Randu touched her forehead. The old gash from Moses Varney's assault was indeed fading. Yes, she whispered, a tiny laugh escaping. I feel a bit healed inside, too. By the end of the year, the rain-washed harmattan winds of northern winter had begun cooling Monrovia's mornings. The Christmas season arrived. Even as Civil War fires burned, armed clashes were spreading around the country and President Taylor cracked down hard on any opponents. More refugees crowded into camps outside Monrovia. Yet at peace in practice things were bustling with success. Calvin's news articles had put their work in the spotlight, and humanitarian organizations began to donate more. The Truth Project had even won grants to continue and expand. Sometimes, though, Randu felt adrift amid all the activity. Agnes, PIP's director, gently asked if she was thinking of the Duluma camp or still worrying about baby girl. Randu hadn't written the letter forgiveness assignment she promised she would do at PIP. A way to heal, because she had been so busy saving lives. She assured Agnes she would get to it someday. It had been a quiet time for her love life as well. Calvin was now in Sierra Leone, covering its war crimes tribunal for the World Journal. They had agreed a few months ago to be just friends until Randu was ready for anything more. But Calvin had been hurt and withdrew. Randu hoped this separation might soften his feelings over time. Meanwhile, life around them tried to carry on. Monrovia filled with holiday hawkers selling cheap toys, clothes, and Christmas decorations along the streets. The exchange rate dropped to around 40 Liberian dollars to the US dollar as traders feared instability. But people continued their seasonal shopping. Children still begged for treats and little plastic Santas, even as whispers of wartime anniversaries floated through the city. Rumors that something major would happen on the uprising's anniversary proved false, and Christmas came and went without incident, much to everyone's relief. Just a few weeks into the new year, However, the fighting suddenly erupted near Gardnersville, a suburb north of Monrovia. Bursts of machine gun and rocket fire sent waves of panic through the city. In the streets, people ran helter-skelter, not knowing where to go. Many fled toward the U.S. Embassy for safety. Seada was caught in this turmoil on her way home from church. Terrified, she saw school children crying and a long line of people with mattresses and belongings on their heads rushing away from the sound of war. She immediately tried phoning Rondu and Terrence, but every line was dead. The only cell network was jammed by everyone calling at once. By sheer terror, Seada rushed home to Rondu's old apartment, clutching only her passport. She said later she prayed in circles in the living room until Terrence finally arrived, safe but shaken. They all agreed it had been the scariest day in their lives. Just after this chaos, the government declared a state of emergency, tightening control as opposition outcry rose. But by then the sisters' thoughts were elsewhere. In the midst of war and politics, something personal happened. Eva Lewis, Rendu's mother, flew in from the United States. It was late December, right before the elections. Eva had missed this annual family trip for the past 10 years because of the war. Traditionally, every April she and her daughters made a pilgrimage to the Palm Grove Cemetery to visit the grave of Benji, Rondu, and Seada's baby brother, who was killed during the 1980 coup on his first birthday. This year, though, Eva had brought a surprise. "I'm here for Benji," she told them in her cheerful way after walking through the front door, "but I'm also here for you." Her daughters exchanged nervous glances as Eva avoided their eyes. "And I'm also here to make preparations for my granddaughter," Eva added casually. Rondu and Seada looked at each other in astonishment. Granddaughter. They each held a heavy suitcase in the guest room. Rondu set her mother's suitcase down and sat on the bed. "Oh, Mommy," she said in a half-annoyed, half-excited tone, "what are you up to?" The heavy April rains soon arrived, washing Monrovia clean and bursting the trees with new growth. To Rendu's surprise, her mother had indeed changed. Eva was unusually gentle and cheerful, even humming Liberian traditional songs at times. Once, when they walked past the family graveyard and saw workmen cleaning the stones, Rondu realized the entire grave plot had been whitewashed, and a beautiful big wreath of white flowers was propped on Benji's tombstone. On April 15th, the date of Benji's death, the whole family went to Palm Grove Cemetery together. A large wreath and flowers from the West African Flower Company stood on the headstone, evidence that Calvin had already been there earlier. Mother and daughters gathered in the midday sun. For the first time in years, Rondu watched her mother stand firm and strong as she placed a wreath at the grave. Together they had a private moment. Seada's shoulders shook, Rendu's tears fell, and Grandma Eva held them up, her own tears secretly flowing as she sang a quiet hymn of love and farewell. After the graveside service, Eva's transformation continued at home. She declared herself Grandma Eva now. The second bedroom was painted a light pink and given a white floral border along the walls. White curtains were sewn for the window. Eva supervised carpenters who built a new child-sized bed and furniture set from the finest mahogany. She had brought solid-colored bedsheets from the States, and even arranged for the quilting group at PIP to make a new quilt with pink and yellow flowers for the bed. Everywhere Rondu looked, baby girl's room was coming to life. Rondu worried that her mother might be preparing for disappointment if the child tracing came up empty. But Agnes reminded her that faith, however small, could still move mountains. Rondu tried to believe that. The very next day a man knocked at her door. He introduced himself as Gabriel, a tracing assistant from the International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC. He said they had a possible lead on a missing child. Rendu's hands flew to her mouth. If this was it, they had found her daughter. Gabriel spoke gently. The tracing department in Ghana had matched some details from their request. They had identified a little girl in the Budu refugee camp in Ghana. Her dossier said she had been separated from her Aunt Aretha and her grandmother Musu around 1996 during the chaos of the April conflicts. She got on a West African ship called the Bulk Challenge with those relatives, but then became separated. All she had was a large teddy bear. During the boat journey, she kept asking people for Annie Oretha and Grandma Musu. Rondu and her mother exchanged glances. Oretha was the name of Rendu's maternal aunt, and Musu was Grandma Eva's family name. Could it really be? It can't be a coincidence? Eva gasped. Rendu's heart leapt as Gabriel said the child's first name was May, last name Davies. May, Rendu's own sister, named in memory of Grandma May, who had died a decade ago. Rondu gasped. The age didn't match at first. If the girl was almost 10 now, a child on the boat in 1996 would have been about 3 or 4. Maybe she had just been a little small. Gabriel noted that the records were not exact. Rondu looked at Eva and whispered, "What if she's Hannah's daughter?" Hannah was a young friend of Rendu's who had a girl around that time. Eva's eyes widened. Hannah had a daughter. You didn't tell me that. Rondu shook her head. Not when I was there. But anything could have happened. Gabriel's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning yet threaded with cautious hope. He spoke of the name Davies and how it had ignited the first real spark of certainty they had felt in years. The Red Cross message addressed to Hannah Davies had not just been a bureaucratic success, but a lifeline, proof that the child had known who she was and where she came from. Bendu nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. She explained to her mother that Davies was the surname of Hannah's rebel husband, a detail that immediately rearranged their understanding of the past. It suggested that Hannah and Joseph had remained together for some time, long enough to form a fragile family unit, and that they were likely the ones who had entrusted baby girl to others for safety. This realization raised more questions than answers. Eva voiced what troubled them all. If Hannah and Joseph were together, why had the child only asked for Annie Oretha and Grandma Musu? Why had their names surfaced instead? Bendu admitted she did not know. She wondered aloud where Hannah and Joseph were by the 6th of April and how long Oretha and Ma Musu had been in Monrovia with her child before circumstances forced another separation. The timeline felt broken, scattered across borders and years of chaos. Gabriel gently reminded them that answers rarely arrived all at once. Some would surface slowly, others never at all. He pointed out how remarkable it was that the child even knew her last name, explaining that most children that young, especially those displaced by war, did not retain such details. Eva's pride shone through her worrying. She declared that the child was a Lewis girl and that intelligence ran in their blood. Gabriel laughed, easing the tension, and Bendu smiled, still shaking her head in disbelief at how close they were to the impossible becoming real. Eva's thoughts leapt ahead. She wanted to know when her grandchild could come home. Gabriel cautioned her to slow down. Reunification was not something that happened instantly. There were procedures to follow. Bendu would need to file a formal request, and beyond that, they had to ensure that May herself was willing to return to her mother's care. Eva bristled at the idea of asking a child. Gabriel explained that under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, even a 10-year-old had the right to participate in decisions affecting her life. He reminded them that May had lived in the camp for years. She had friends, routines, a sense of belonging, that life could not simply be erased. Though reunification was the goal, Gabriel explained that sometimes it was not immediately in a child's best interest, especially with the renewed fighting across the country. Even if approval came, they might have to wait until Liberia was more stable. Eva sighed, the hope tempered now with patience. Bendu asked where May was currently living and learned she was in a children's home. The people from the ship had cared for her for a while, but could not keep her due to their own responsibilities. Eva wiped away tears as the reality of how many hands had held her grandchild settled in. Gabriel outlined the next steps: meetings, planning, paperwork for travel documents, and waiting until it was safe to bring the child home. In the meantime, Bendu could begin writing to May, exchanging letters and photographs. Patience, he reminded them gently, was essential. Time moved forward. One September morning, Rain poured heavily as Bendu stepped from her car and ran toward the shelter of an office building awning. She greeted others hiding from the downpour and watched school children hurry uphill as bells rang, urging them onward. Smiling at the familiar scene, she went upstairs to Peace in Practice. New groups were beginning their peace education and vocational training, and Tenna was starting full-time as a peer counselor. Since Agnes had taken her in, Tenna's strength in the face of illness had become a source of quiet inspiration. Bendu marveled at Agnes's unwavering faith and generosity. Alone in the office, Bendu prepared herself. She knew healing was ongoing and uneven, but she wanted to begin this new phase grounded and steady. Sitting at her desk, she took out a new writing pad. It sent stirring memories of school days long past. She realized why she had hesitated to write the letter she now felt compelled to begin. Writing to those who had shaped her pain felt dangerous, but she chose to transform the exercise into something of her own. She wrote to Benji, to Granny May, to Jonah, acknowledging their presence in her life and the way love had shaped her. She addressed Moses Varney too, recognizing that the war and the people within it had changed her forever, but that she had survived and grown stronger. The words flowed easily now. She wrote of recent months, of Calvin's softened heart and his scholarship program for war-affected youth, of Siada's divorce and newfound freedom, and of how truth mattered more than appearances. Most of all, she wrote of May's return. She described the joy of seeing her daughter for the first time, her resemblance to Granny May, her dark skin and unstraightened hair, her sharp questions and Ghanaian accent. She wrote of watching her eat and grow stronger, of waiting for anger that never came, of a child who knew she belonged. Eva spoiled her, Ben embraced her, and Calvin stepped into the role of godfather with devotion. When May asked if she could call him father, Bendu wept and smiled at once. She wrote of fear and hope for Liberia, of marches and unanswered pleas, of grief for the dead and guilt for her own silence during the war. She wrote of justice, accountability, and the need for redemption. Pausing, she looked at the photographs on her desk, rearranged them, and continued. Letting go, she wrote, had given her purpose. She had found a place between remembering and forgetting, a place of transformation. She ended by acknowledging unanswered questions, rumors of survival, and the possibility of redemption even for those once lost. Signing her name, she dated the letter September 2002, sealing her journey with resolve.